The climate change policy debate has switched, of course, as you know, to Labor's promise to set a new greenhouse gas reduction target, net zero emissions by 2050. Labor has refused to cost it. It insults all of us, actually, by saying whatever it costs, doing nothing will cost us more. Yet anyone with an IQ above room temperature can work out there will be no cost if Australia doesn't do any more than it already is. But across the ditch, New Zealand has had a look at this. The New Zealand Institute of Economic Research has costed a net zero scenario and says, surprise, surprise, it costs more. Average GDP growth from 2017 to 2050 drops from 2.1% to 1.9% with a zero net emissions target, it said. This equates to real GDP dropping by an average $7.8 billion a year for a zero net emissions target compared to the status quo. And how about this for cutting to the chase? The more ambitious the 2050 target, the larger the costs to households. Pretty straightforward and obvious, isn't it? Pretty unsurprising. Former Resources Minister here, Matt Canavan, says that converted to Australia, this means an annual cost of at least $200 billion to our economy, perhaps double that. And at least 200,000 fewer jobs, again, perhaps double that. I guess it's good to have some figures out there now. Those are very big and worrying figures. Labor, Anthony Albanese, Mark Butler and co, they can either accept those figures or provide some other calculations. Let's go to South Australia's Energy Minister now. Joining us live from Adelaide is Dan Van Hulst-Pelican. Thanks for joining us, Dan. I'll come to net zero emissions by 2050 in just a moment. But first up, when it comes to the renewables debate, your state has just been through a very accidental experiment, if you like. You were disconnected for over 2 weeks at the start of this month from the national grid, effectively, and you managed to get through it. What got you through that period?
Well, yes, we did, Chris. Storm damage to towers in Victoria meant that our interconnector with Victoria, our major interconnector with Victoria, went down and didn't operate for nearly 2 weeks. And we got through it because some very clever people were able to find some workarounds. We were very fortunate to have fairly mild weather here in South Australia, but we also got through it because our South Australian government policies are very much about getting the energy supply mix right. Anybody who thinks that you can get by just with fossil fuels or just with renewables is wrong on either count. You must get the mix right.
Well, I don't know about on either count. You could easily get by just on fossil fuels. You certainly couldn't get by on renewables on their own. As you say, you were very lucky with the weather. A heat wave would have really tested you. But there's been some suggestions coming out of South Australia that it was the renewables that got you through, whereas the figures that I've checked suggest that close to 70% of your energy needs through that period were provided by gas-fired electricity.
Well, Chris, I say again, anybody who just wants one or the other is not going to come up with a sensible solution. We need to have gas. Gas will be with us for decades to come, particularly gas in new modern generation that can enter and leave the market within minutes. But wind and sun are here with us. They make a very, very sensible contribution. They are the cheapest marginal cost supply by far.
Yeah, we understand that argument. I just made the point.
And interconnection is also very important.
Yeah, right. So, but the point here is you lost your interconnector to Victoria. You didn't have the luxury of backup coal-fired power coming in from Victoria. Effectively, I know there was a small exception, but effectively South Australia was on its own. And during that period, your renewable energies didn't get anywhere near the 50% target you set. Is it not the case that during that period, close to 70% of your energy was provided by gas-fired electricity?
Well, Chris, first of all, we don't have a 50% target. For you to say that we set a 50% target is a mistake. I say with respect, we don't have a renewable energy target. What we have is an intention to make sure that electricity is as affordable, as reliable and as clean as possible. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you get the mix right. Now, yes, it is true that we consumed more gas generated electricity during that time. No doubt about that. But what we were doing was we were using storage. We have 4 grid-scale batteries now in South Australia. We were using storage, we were using gas, we were using sun and using wind. And importantly, the interconnector is not just about importing electricity from other states. It's also very much about exporting electricity. At times we have an enormous amount of surplus renewable electricity, which is very cheap, which we export into
Absolutely,
state.
absolutely. Now, if I could just check with you for the third time, though, you've suggested that you have the majority of power electricity supplied by gas generation during that period. Was it of the order of 70%?
Oh, look, I don't have the number, Chris, so I'm not trying to dodge it. I don't have the number. But it was...
Well, I've checked the number. Did you dispute my number of 70%?
There was more gas generation used than renewable energy used at that time for a wide range of reasons. What I'm saying, though, is that we need another interconnector with New South Wales. What happened was the vulnerability of being interconnected with just one state was exposed. We were very fortunate to get through for a wide range of reasons, including managing the mix of supply. But what we need and what we intend to deliver for people in partnership with industry is another interconnector between South Australia and New South Wales so that we can offset our supply and demand with them and use both gas and wind and sun and storage as wisely as possible for the benefit of all consumers.
Now, you say you don't have this 50% renewable target. Your predecessors, the Labor government, obviously had that 50% target and essentially had built that out. You haven't rescinded it, but obviously you're disowning that target. You don't want to disown it.
Actually, we have rescinded it, Chris, very clearly. Before the last election, we said that we think having a renewable energy generation target within a state is actually a silly thing to do.
It sure is, but you've got everything that was
the mix right.
You've got all the renewables that were built out under that target, and you've signed up to the zero net emissions as a state, zero net emissions by 2050. Has there been any costing done on that target as far as your state is concerned?
Well, that target has been presented, as you know, by the Environment Minister. With regard to costs, what I'm focused on is the cost of electricity for South Australians. I'm determined to make the renewable energy that was left to us by our predecessors, make it affordable, make it reliable, and make it work for consumers. The cost of electricity for South Australian consumers, from the smallest household through to the largest employer, is my highest priority, and that's what I'm working on. The way we'll do that is with interconnection with New South Wales, small and large-scale grid-scale storage, with gas generation and with renewable generation.
Yeah, lots of gas. You wouldn't want them all to have as much renewable, much reliance on renewables as you have at the moment, right? Wouldn't be much fun if New South Wales and New South Wales and Victoria were both in that boat.
Chris, I've said very openly before, we have more wind farms in South Australia than we need. Said it in opposition, said it in government. But it would be crazy to think that we should shut them down. What we need to do is get the mix right.
Absolutely.
Be smarter, not just say we want a high renewable energy penetration just so we look good like the previous government did. We're going to use the renewable energy that we've got. We're going to mix it with gas, mix it with interconnection, mix it with storage, and we're going to make electricity cheaper and more reliable for our South Australians.
Thanks for joining us, Minister. Appreciate it.